I think this could be the kind of start of our mini DAOs concept. I think each of the dApps can have their own little decision-making structure. So I think at the outcome of these, we want something we can present to the users, which will, form a kind of decision-making structure. So we can almost build an influence out of the kind of things that we can do. Does that make sense?
An influence vote on what, like on where to take it, like the kind of what votes next, for example?
Yeah, just like there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff. We just need tags for each thing that we want to do. So, for example, new chains might be, and then we can talk about the payoffs and if we can do it and all that sort of stuff. We've always had this sort of concept of like hierarchical governance, that there's going to be specific conversations about specific sub things within the system. So I think we can build out signaling votes for each of the dApps, and that's the kind of start of it. Eventually we'll have funding and potential. By the end of the day, I'd like us to be, I'm going to start experimenting with our governance framework stuff. So we want to build out a specification for, and that creates a kind of framework for people to talk about them. So, for example, the tag of markets and token economics would be a way to suggest changes to the token economics on it. So I'll develop that for the next couple of sessions in the background, and then we can start doing it collaboratively by the end of the day.
Okay, we need to go through like what the plan is for the app. I think when UV gets there, if we get an update on where we stand with the development on influence.
So I think the kind of general structure for each of these sessions should be start with where we're at now.
Mm-hmm.
And where we could the potential development thereafter. So now and then in the future, which will generate a range of possibilities that we can go out to government's votes.
Yeah. So just when it comes to influence, I mentioned this to you the other day that UV and I had discussed potentially launching influence on BSC, so that BSC citizens could use it.
Yeah.
I think that's one tag we could definitely vote on.
Yes, definitely. It raises an interesting question. So let's say we have a markets mini DAO. We have votes on each of the chains. Could get very vote heavy. But yeah, just something to think about.
So we were thinking this, like, for example, at the moment, we either have ETH ID or we have token weighted, but it's still all on Ethereum. And we're on, like, whether to go multi-chain with influence, I think is an interesting thing to discuss.
Yeah, I agree. Let's bring that up on the influence session.
Okay, and then there's the other topic of bringing on more collaborators for the app, like we've been discussing so far.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm here.
Hey,
man.
So you're talking about more collaborators with the app?
We're talking about influence, where we can go with it. So I mentioned what you and I discussed about launching it on like multi-chain, BSC or Polygon.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's whether, like, these are like priorities for the app, like where we want to go. And then the other one would be also onboarding more like customers to the app, people who will use it for their communities.
And I think that's kind of the goal of going multi-chain would be to get more customers or different kinds of customers. But the more kind of off Ethereum we go, I think the more degen we get. And I guess it's worth thinking about. I want to have, just as like high level objectives, I think it'd be great to have lots of partners using influence with a variety of industries. I think that would be like, and then like, how do we do that? It's multi-chain could be one step in that direction. And but then there's like, how do we find the partners? How do they find us? So as far as development, we're basically ready to start onboarding more partners. As soon as we get the final spreadsheet from our next partner, which I think is secret for now, we're going to be ready to go. So this is exciting. I think we're at a nice milestone of quite scalable and quite usable. I think we need to find the gas pedal in terms of who wants to use this and why.
So we could technically we have a way for them to set up their own votes, right? We're just going to handhold a little bit in order to give them intro to the system.
That's right. Yeah, and that's going to be a customer onboarding process that we're going to document and make more explicit over time. We're going to adapt it. It may turn out that there's like unexpected friction or like certain things are easy and we don't really need to do them for them. But yeah, then there's this larger question of like, how do our partners onboard their users? That's
well, do we help them with that? or not? Like that's also whether we get involved in that or not.
I think for now, I would say let's definitely not commit to doing it because we don't really know how to do it. It's going to be very ad hoc, but we should probably take notes as we get more partners and see how they do it and share that with new partners and be like, hey, this is something that's worked in the past, just as kind of bonus, not rather than like part of the package.
I think Senya mentioned like that we should have a generalized kind of deck to propose like this usage of the app, and maybe as part of that we could start building out an onboarding process into like guide into it, because there's a guide on how to use it, for example. We can work on that actually for the next while. So from a development perspective, where like are we stopping at this phase and letting it run for a while?
I think this is a good time to consolidate and polish and improve performance and any UX issues that appear or bugs, because it's a major upgrade in terms of, one, now we're on chain, not 100% on chain, but the voter registration, voter validation, and all the entire voter data set, it goes all on chain. It's just the thing that we just don't have vote verification on chain, but it's publicly auditable. So there's and then we've got our NFTs as voter IDs integrated into it. So there's, as far as like what we've discussed, I feel like we have, and we've generalized it so that we can have different kinds of price schedules with the NFTs. So if we want to do something really degen with BSC or like or Shiba, just like go raid their community and be like, get in before the price goes to 1 million ether, just something ridiculous like that, like we could do it.
So what, like a bonding curve, like a curve like we have with ours?
Yeah, exactly. It's I abstracted out so we'll have still the same like Merkle identity contract, but we're just going to have a different, we call it a gate internally. So there's like, for our first partner, it's going to be a fixed price gate, just some small price. But then for Shiba, I think it should be like either linear or possibly even exponential bonding curve. You just do something really outrageous, since these people are like,
if we go for a big play, it needs to be reflected.
Mindful that we've been talking about influence in the markets chat, shall we use the remaining 40 minutes or whatever we've got to wrap up market?
Yeah.
Do you want to give us a kind of your perspective on the state of development for markets at the moment?
We really haven't been developing it other than to just try these different BSC node providers out and see if we can get them to cough up some event subscriptions. And anyway, I'm in a chat with Chainstack, and theirs also craps out in a different way than the other ones did, but it's a bit of a shit show, and we could re-architect our project to not need those events. That seems to me to be the long-term solution. It's like, for some reason, there's this repeating pattern where, like, hey, I'm getting this issue when I search for events, and then like their tech support just disappears. Yeah, and it's happened at this, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times now, and then they come back a while later, and we try to. So it's just like it's a repeating thing that there's a sense of like, it just costs more and more energy as time goes on without any obvious gains. And there's also this other solution that we know would solve it, but takes a bit more energy. So I don't know. It's just like we have to allocate our resources.
So let's talk about that then. So we've got an issue with essentially events not being available on Binance Smart Chain. And there's a potential, and we just keep getting the runaround from node providers. And basically what we're doing is we're just exposing that their archive node doesn't actually work. And then they go, oh shit, and try and fix it, but then disappear on us. So there's a potential for a re-architecture. Can you describe what would need to happen for that to happen? Yeah,
to do it on BSC, if we just took that localized issue, then we need to redo our. Now we could cobble together a new version of the identity contract that doesn't rely on events, because basically the central issue is that there's other issues, but the central one is that we determine ownership of NFTs by a transfer event. So there's no simple way to query what NFTs does this user own. Now, there is an extension to the ERC 721 standard that we do implement in our other NFT contracts, which is basically what we would attach to the identity contract and be like a fork of our identities. And
there's something in the ERC 720. So just so I understand, there's when we watch for transfer events, which allows us to track who owns what NFT.
Exactly, and we can filter based on the sender and receiver. So we basically say, give me all the transfer events that went to this user, and then we filter out and then we manually go through and see which ones they still own. So that's how it currently works in markets.vote.
So there's the minting is not an event. So basically, we see when an ID is minted, we know which address it's gone to, and that's the kind of book on that. But then after that,
there's a different event for minting. But we don't use that one because somebody might have acquired it by transferring it on OpenSea or something.
Yeah.
And so the natural solution is to extend it using the ERC 721 enumerable standard, so that we can query the tip of the chain. The thing is, events come from deep in the blockchain, arbitrarily deep. Whereas with the enumerable standard, we could just query the tip of the chain and say, in the current state, give me a list of IDs that belong to this person. And in retrospect, that would have been the right thing to do from the beginning. And it was just, we were moving fast and I was trimming down what we had to do, and I cut out the standard. And so that's how we got into this mess. So that would solve about half or a little more than half of the issues. There's also events that we use for getting the prices from our Chainlink Oracle. And that could also be re-architected to not need prices. It would just be, it would cost a little more gas, but we got to store the history of prices in this state in such a way that we can query the tip of the chain and get all the information we need.
So at the moment, we're querying events where we're collecting prices from the Chainlink Oracle.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is explicitly used just for settling the markets.
Okay. Yeah. So Chainlink Oracle is used to settle the markets, but the events are used to query the prices at which they were settled for past markets, which we display on the front end. And so the sort of in Ethereum world, it makes sense to just, if the information is only used by, say, an interface, then put it in an event, because then that saves you gas.
Yeah.
Assuming the events are actually available, because you didn't try to do something really extreme with your blockchain. But this is a different architecture that we didn't anticipate.
So there's two bits of development. So is that the other half? Is that the other use of events that we've got in there?
I think so, yeah.
Like, in terms of resources, how long would that take? Like, how much work is it?
I think most of the work is in getting the front end to start playing differently based on which chain it's on. So there's going to be like, so it adds a fair bit of complexity to the app. As far as like how long, I don't know. If we got 2 engineers working on it, we could probably do it in a week. And so we just have to decide what the priority is. Okay.
And the other payoff is that essentially the current identities become unusable.
Yeah, we would be redeploying we'd also have to redeploy the markets contract. It would be basically a full system reset.
Yeah.
So everyone would lose their voice credits.
Yeah. So essentially the voice credit balances, essentially the game resets, right? So now this is from my understanding, and I think this probably needs to happen anyway. So it was always the idea that we'd have multiple vote markets doing different things. And this was essentially a new game each time we did it. So if we bring in a new vote market, the game resets and everyone starts from scratch again.
Yeah, that's right.
So V is non-transferable between markets.
Yeah, and also between NFT contracts.
Yeah, so that's useful to know. So I think this is obviously a key bugbear for our users, and we keep going around in circles with the node providers. Chainstack seemed to be the most responsive that we've had in a while.
Yeah, I've been in a private chat with their guy the past couple days.
Okay, so we still might be able to recover events on BSC, but I think we do need to draw an end to that sort of headless chicken race at some point.
Yeah, we have to pick a point where we've had enough.
Broadly, so let's review the kind of current state of markets, if you like. We're on ballot mid-30s on the Ethereum chain, 36. We're getting consistently quite a lot of vote. You'd expect votes to trend upwards anyway, because existing voters are getting higher voting power in each subsequent round if they're correct. So I think there's a few things I think we need to understand. One is, what's the actual adoption of the markets? How many actual players have we got?
Which,
So,
yeah, I mean, I can get that data. Just what's the number of voter IDs and how many addresses own them?
yeah.
And how has that changed over time?
Yeah. And so, as a kind of review of what the kind of purpose of this app is, one of our key pillars is this idea of market discovery. So it's the point of this game was to create an incentivized voting dynamic, which essentially pays users for declaring their bias in the market. So here's this list of tokens. Which ones do you think are the best? And which ones do you think are most likely to perform in the market over time? So we've been essentially juggling around the same 10 tokens on both chains since the inception. And the idea was that we broaden this out so that this list becomes curatable by the crowd. So we've got this on-chain list, which is, this is the official top league table of tokens. And then we've got this kind of snapshot orientated process using influence, which determines what tokens goes into it. That I still think is an incredibly valuable thing in the space, which is, we've seen it play out since the inception of this over the last 36 weeks. We've just seen an incredible amount of new tokens hit the market, many of them just complete forks and just random shitcoins. So the potential to have a curated list of tokens on each chain is still super valuable. Not just that, but being able to have dialogue from users who are doing the due diligence on these tokens.
Yeah, and my view of it is that the real, like, you could almost just zoom in on the influence vote, like what token next, without piping it into markets.
Yeah.
Because I almost feel like influence is an evolution of markets in a way, and it's like that dialogue and the fact that like people don't have to pay gas to vote on influence, I think, is a big upgrade. And there's also, like, we gain a certain ability to gate the information. So we could say if you hold a certain amount of tokens, you get access to the information earlier, which we've talked about with dashboard. So there's like kind of an opportunity. So yeah, I agree that it, like, this token submission and then voting on what token next it feels GameStop generator. It creates this funnel where a bunch of gremlins can all it's a shelling point generator.
Yeah. So what tokens are we concentrating on at the moment, and why? So it was in response to this issue of permissionlessness generating an innumerable amount of tokens. Like, it just becomes absolutely impossible to parse. So generating essentially our market report, and we could get to the point where, the sort of JSON file that's generated by influence is automatically parsed into a kind of PDF that is released, like, let's say monthly. And in order to be able to look at this document, you need to hold, let's say, 10,000 tokens or 100,000 tokens or something. That is something I really like us to get to. That's like potentially an evolution of markets that could be super valuable, because I think that users are going to say, what tokens should I be looking at? And then you've got this.
Download the what token next report. It's just like, there's such a clear call to action there. It's what everyone wants. What fucking token next do we read the fucking report?
Read the report, and you need to hold tokens to get it. So back to the kind of point, I think what we'd be missing. So essentially, actually, although markets, it's broken on BSC, let's just review the game, if you like. So it sounds like we could be at a point where we consider either retiring markets in its current state, but what we'd lose if we just let influence take over on markets is the on-chain settlement of the predictions, right?
That's right. That's right. We'd lose it. We'd still have the source code, but we would no longer be doing that. And so there's a kind of like insertion of now, but there's also, like, with influence right now, we haven't really specified a reward system. And
so the influence doesn't have a reward system. It's not on chain. So we're not capturing on chain histories of voting. and there's no decentralized mechanism for payouts.
Well, we have the Merkle vesting thing. We can use that. It would just be like, we would have some kind of, okay, we publish on chain. Here's the vote data. Here's the, now the thing that what token next doesn't have to necessarily have a time limit on it or like a specific prediction of which one's going to raise how much, although it could. And so, yeah, so there's a question of like, do we want to carry the prediction market aspect into influence? Because right now it doesn't have the prediction market. It's more you just reach consensus, and then what happens with that consensus is like off app.
Yeah. So I like the design. I think we've created a new kind of prediction market here that it is valuable. I think it is interesting, and it is decentralized. We've basically left it running for the last 20 weeks without barely touching it, at least over the 10 or 15 weeks, apart from wrangling over the events on BSC.
Yeah.
So that's valuable. We've generated a automated application that just, and that there's potential for this to develop into something more substantial. So let's wind back without sort of although we've comes with the problems that going on chain gives you, which is gas costs and just running up against infrastructure issues. But I still think there's the potential here. So in the white papers, if you like, there's the scope of this application would eventually turn into a kind of on-chain betting game, right? Where there's a pool of tokens that so people can essentially leverage to have their free bet if they want, and what they get is the base level of incentivization out of the reward pool. But if they wanted to, they could play against each other by staking more tokens on it. And this creates this kind of like pari-mutuel pool, which could be super interesting, I think. So I'm a little bit resistant to just say we should just leave that development trajectory there.
Here's another drawback to it is that we're essentially diluting the token supply to reward people for these predictions, which we haven't been able to establish that these predictions actually have like alpha. And although we haven't gone deep into the analysis of it, so that's an open question that I think could help us answer this or help us make this decision. Because if it's a prediction market, are the predictions accurate? If they're not, then it's an interesting system, and it perhaps maybe some tweaked version of it would generate accurate predictions. But that's
okay. So we need that analysis to find out if there's any. The other thing that the potential where this can go is what we've essentially got here is an index of tokens, right? So it's an index which we get a weekly balance of. There's the potential that balance, that index as balanced by vote, which essentially aggregates sentiment from a distributed group of people, it is better than a equally balanced index. So if there's 10 tokens in the list, 10% of 10% exposure to each token would produce a certain ROI, right? So
and that's essentially the definition of alpha. Is you look at how much better than some benchmark you do, and then sometimes you weight by like volatility relative to the volatility of the benchmark. Did you have to pay for your gains with more volatility?
Yes. And so
there's also another kind of generalization of this, which is basically what Alan sent me this PDF yesterday. I want to send it to you guys, but like basically the idea being that we generalize. We've got these users giving us signals. Essentially, is one way to look at it, and then. So there's what signals are valuable. And so we need there's an implied like trading bot or like trading signals system there. And those signals could come on chain or off chain, and they could be a wide variety of things. We can ask one of the things about influence that's I think an advantage is that it's very agile. So we can, if we want to ask a different kind of question on markets, we have to have a different Oracle system. And so it requires development to ask a different question. Whereas on influence, you could have a different question every week or every day, really. And so I think, I think rapidly iterating through the questions, so to speak, would be necessary to establish which questions actually produce some signal.
Yes.
Because it's unlikely that the first question we ask is actually going to be like the question that unlocks the secrets of the market's next move. And
so I agree. It's like influence is this more agile because it's off chain, right? So not an on-chain technology. So we can iterate around it. We can change the rules of the game very quickly. The way I'm looking at this is the markets is the kind of the thing that we could ossify into this on-chain thing. So it could be used for, so let's say we've got this index that is weighted by vote, and we actually use the outcome of that to actually trade the tokens. So
I think one of the advantages of like putting this abstraction layer between it is that instead of directly like basically letting the votes tell us exactly how to distribute the portfolio, if you place it alongside many other signals, then it makes it a lot less likely to be gamed, because it's put in the context of what's the market as a whole doing, or what's the volatility of Bitcoin today, or like what's the sentiment analysis on Twitter. Because if we just make the index, then it's, oh wow, I can make like money flow based on how I vote. Let me go buy a bunch of identities and shift the vote a certain way.
Yeah, which we knew from day one, which is why we built the auction mechanism. But you can simulate what it costs money.
But it's just in the quantitative trading world, if you're making a trading bot and it's, you're trading on signals, you don't want to trade on just one signal.
Yeah.
And that's just, because it just becomes very fragile. So
the way that it does become fragile, I wouldn't say that we'd ever be in a situation where we'd be like, let's say, exposing the treasury 100% to the signal that comes out of this. But the potential outcome for an index that is balanced by essentially consensus is really valuable. And I don't think we should necessarily abandon the development trajectory at the moment just because the first iteration hasn't essentially, and we don't know that it's, if there's anything in that or not.
Right, and it's an empirical question. We can answer that question.
Yeah. So I think that one of the major questions is, does the system as it currently stands have alpha? And we can do that by analyzing against the benchmark of a flat weighted index.
I have a question, but how many users do we need to actually play this game in order to say that it's a sample which is large enough? If it's just a bunch of people who are super nerdy that hang out with us, are they just representative of some special demographic that might not?
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know. There is essentially a sentiment indicating algorithm. I think there's ways to tune this game. I think that, so let's talk about what could we do to improve the game exactly in its
make
current
people
iteration.
stake more. Make people stake so they think twice before they bet.
Yeah, so imply a cost to playing. So I'm thinking, right, markets 2.0. What does it look like? And again, there's things that are outlined in the kind of development trajectory that we could do. So we said that we could have essentially a trading game whereby there's a league table of players in the game based on their historic market performance. So there's the potential for a league table game there. People like that. It will allow our identities to turn into more sort of avatar driven things, because we see, okay, look, identity 12 has this trading history, and that will provide sort of analytical information for people to potentially stake some money on those voters and do a copy trading type thing. Again, this is what was articulated in the white paper. So do we think that's, let's say we reset the game, start fresh with a new vote market, we fix the events issues, we have an instance on Polygon, Binance Smart Chain if we can get it working, and essentially any of the other EVM compatible chains. What else would we change for markets 2.0?
I just wanted to say a quick note. Like, I think if the main intention is to discover alpha in the market based on people actually doing due diligence on tokens and figuring out based on research, what they think is going to perform well, I think we should definitely take away the aspect of just like being able to just farm tokens, because I feel like that's, especially on BSC, that's what a lot of users are most likely doing, is just hedging their bets and farming tokens. And once you gain more V power, it's more easy to do that, and it's just like this repetitive cycle where it gets easier and easier to hedge your bets, and you get more of the reward pot until you reach a point where you may actually get most of the reward pot, depending on how long you voted.
You have to make them stake there and lose if they actually wrong.
Yeah, so we've somewhat got a nothing at stake problem, particularly on BSC. And so there's a staking dynamic potential, so nothing at stake problem on there. And
But
we've
give
got
them
this.
a free bet, the first free bet like a casino, and then you have to buy your chips.
Well, and this kind of highlights I think a larger issue, which is that the market is a very appropriate name for the app because the market already does this. They predict the market, and you put your money where your mouth is and buy the things, and you're right, then you make money. And if you're wrong, then you lose money. So it's a little bit of like a recapitulation of what markets already do. And just from a point of view of, let's say you are some like super savvy trader who knows what the market's going to do next. That's amazing. Why would you use our app? You're probably already a millionaire. Like, why would you tell other people so you can get a small piece of a pot of FET?
Maybe to prove that you were actually right, because a lot of people say, like in copy trading platforms, you can be on a leaderboard. I'm not sure how it's recorded on chain, your trades. I don't really know how the copy trading works, but for instance, if you claim to be a really cool trader, can people check if you actually are? You know?
Yeah, so there are like in these platforms you would be able to review the trader's history, and then you can like automatically copy them, and then they're basically, it's kind of like forming a miniature hedge fund that's like very fluid. People can hop in and out, but like the trader gets more capital to play with, and there's some kind of sharing of, they have a success fee, essentially they get a certain percent of the extra money they make, everyone. And
just let's stop that. So there's like an eToro like copy trading system potentially here, and I do think that's potentially viable. So yeah, okay, why would you play it rather than just bet on the market? One of the things is that it's the reason why we started at the free bet, because in the market you need capital in order to make those gains in the market, whereas on this essentially just declaring your bias. And then if we have this leaderboard dynamic, you then be able to essentially, it's a gamified process of me versus the rest of a group of traders. And I think that could be quite interesting, and a game that, so one of our users said it yesterday, which is these games are the potential for an adoption vector for us to it is where all our users are at the moment and have been for the last 30 weeks. So it's
and this is also how everyone understands what we are. Like every time you talk to an MAA, to Gremlins, prediction markets, everyone knows what it is. You start talking about governance tech, everyone just lost already.
Yeah. So I think
and also we're giving away free money. It's, that does attract people.
Yeah. That's why it's an adoption vector, because let's talk about this farming tokens problem. I do think the V power dynamic is a reputation factor. Now, it's not a very good one, but I always knew this. It's like most basic reputation factor, right? If you like, you are just given more voice for being correct over time. And this has this compounding dynamic whereby the more you're right, the more votes you get, which means the more you're right, the more votes you get. And what's happening is they're going exponential out of the game. So I don't know what the highest V level is at the moment. And I think that this will come out in the sort of analysis. But yeah, eventually there's going to be, it's almost like a proxy for how real wealth distribution works. It's like the more money you've got, the more wealthy you get exponentially. So
I mean, I can tell you it's also like the more money you have, the more people try to steal it, and it's not actually that easy to hold on to a lot of money. It's a lot of energy. It's very easy to win the lottery and then they lose it all in a few years. So,
yeah, that's true. There's this compounding dynamic. Those who can do it right compound their wealth.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we've got this reputation system that compounds essentially. And what's happening is it's trending towards a small number of players who are essentially going to take the whole pot, and it becomes less useful as a less useful dynamic for new users to come in. If you're coming in with 100 voice credits, you've just minted an ID and you're playing, it's you versus somebody who's got potentially 20x the voting power with you on a single ID, and they may have 5 IDs with 20x the voting power that the new person has. So you've got this kind of like asymmetric power dynamic, which was what it was designed to do. So the question is I think one of the next iterations is around a more analytical conversation around the reputation factors. So
yeah, I think it's interesting. I think It's interesting because the what you just described there doesn't necessarily reflect that you're good at predicting the market. Because if you've just been doing it for a long time, then you can compound that
Yeah.
V by hedging your bets. So I think in the next iteration, maybe it would be worthwhile to consider how to make it more reflective of actually predicting correctly.
Yes. So it's an artifact of the sort of nature of the game. So you can hedge your bets. That's the point of it, right? So in a typical over/under prediction market, you're just guessing if the price is going to be higher or lower than a fixed amount. And what we've got here is a market ordering dynamic. So you're guessing on the market ordering rather than just over/under price, which again is an interesting and novel system. And there's the potential. So for V at the moment, it's just this simple doubling system, and it breaks over time as the arbitrary people are not guessing the market, are just essentially just not even looking at the market, just arbitrarily picking tokens. It's possible that we can iterate on this reputation factor in a way that is a better proxy for market prediction. And so I think we've genuinely got one of the first reputation factors in crypto with this. Now, it's not a very good one, but we've got a system where we've got a pseudonymous identity and an associated reputation that evolves over time. And this is a kind of, I think it's a breakthrough moment for the reputation layer in crypto. And it's not something where it was never going to be right first time. The question is, how can we now nuance that to better do it? Has anyone got any ideas for how you could improve the V dynamic?
Well, I'd like to zoom out because I think there's a larger question here about what is this thing? Is it a research project? Is it an app that's supposed to turn into money for us and the users at some point? And because I guess like when we're looking at how to spend our finite and limited resources, we're projecting into the future. We could do this, we could do that, we could do that. One of the metrics that I think you and I, Nick, and I think many other people that we use is that interesting from like a kind of research point of view. You and I are both researchers. And however, I don't know if we may be overweighting that piece of the objective function because of our just native curiosity. I'm like thinking,
I'd agree with you if there wasn't a potential end game of this that was incredibly valuable. So if it was just pointlessly, if I was just thinking, okay, let's run a game to see if reputation factors are possible in crypto, right? That's the point of it. Let's just pay some people for purely academic exercise of, is it possible to attribute a reputation factor to people predicting like stuff in the market? Or tangentially, is it purely an experiment in quadratic voting? Is quadratic voting possible in an on-chain dynamic, which I think we've proved?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that, is it somewhat of a research project? Yeah, of course. Like everything, you could say basically everything in crypto is a research project. But is there an end game to this that could be potentially valuable? Yes, I think there is. I think the potential to have a consensus weighted index is potentially $1 billion idea.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, in terms of sort of iterations on it, as you were suggesting, it feels to me that that whole thing about hedging your bets and putting a bet on everything and that being easier, obviously, the more you have, like, that could potentially be solved. And this might be flawed fundamentally from the start, as with most things I say. But that feels like it could be resolved by the reward being allocated by the percentage of whatever stack you have that you allocated to the winning token, which sort of forces you to, if you want more, you're going to have to, regardless of how much you've got, the higher the percentage you put on the winning token, the more of the pot you'll receive. But I appreciate that's obviously a fundamental rule change as to how we currently run it. And the other thing that occurs to me is just, I suppose it's easier to, at a base level, it's easier to just throw money at any sort of token when, for example, the FVT value has decreased slightly because the rewards are slightly less in terms of sort of USD value, if you see what I mean. Like, you're putting, in fairness, sometimes you're putting less thought into it because it's, if I get some, whereas obviously when the stakes are slightly higher, people are focusing in more, and I think that has definitely. I've seen a shift in that in terms of some of my secondary accounts, in that I just go, oh, I know this might happen, this might not happen, but I definitely wouldn't have done that when it was a slightly larger sum of money at stake.
Yeah, so that's the kind of this nothing at stake problem, right? Where there isn't enough incentive to properly declare your bias in the market. Like I've certainly experienced that too, right? Earlier on, I was looking at charts every week. It made me go and look at each of these. I understand a lot about each of those 10 tokens in that list now. So I think that kind of dynamic of incentivizing research in these tokens is a really interesting one. So I think we're at a bit of a crossroads with this. I'm interested to see, we need the analytics. So we've got this, so that each of these things, we've got to start giving the users more agency over the future of these applications, right? So I want to open up a conversation about where this goes next. I'm not at all against the idea of essentially ending this development trajectory if we think that it's fundamentally flawed and cannot be iterated on in the future. I don't think that's the case. I think that there is an iteration of this application that could potentially yield something very valuable in the future. But I think
one thing that popped into my mind was we could do an on-chain version of Numerai, where basically people stake their predictions in FVT, and they get paid out a percent but they get paid out based on, like, we're actually betting on what they're saying as a group of others. So it's actually very similar to what Alan is proposing, except for if we just add this staking element, because that solves the nothing at stake problem.
Yeah. So we've got the staking. I think we should explore the potential iteration around the staking. I think we should explore what would have. There's a lot of retrospective analysis we can do on this, and that there is, like you said earlier, there is a cost to this, right? So these two markets have 100,000 FET per week cost to the economy, right? So that's 5.2 million tokens a year on each chain, right? So that's a 10 million token inflationary dynamic to the system. Now, what does that bring us? It could bring us new users. So if we launch this on Polygon, for example, let's say we do the stonks market on Polygon, which is what we've talked about, that could bring us 1,000 users, in which case the 5 million FET over a year is absolutely worth it. So I think where I think we should leave this is, I've made some notes here. I'm going to pile this into our sort of governance framework dynamic, and then I think we open it up to the users to make suggestions on future iterations of this game.
Partnerships with some, just hypothetical, but we could theoretically partner with a trading platform, like a copy trading platform, and just
we could do. I think
as a DApp that works from within their, that just integrated in their interface, and it's a fun thing. I don't think I know any other quadratic voting prediction markets on the price, right? It's unique.
There isn't one. Yeah, it's unique. We've got a unique thing here, and I think the current iteration of the design, it's far from optimal. But what is Markets 2.0? I think is the question we should spend like a couple of months thinking about, and construct opportunities for the users to get involved in that conversation. I don't think we should kill it, personally, which I'm sensing that you think we should just basically walk away from.
Yeah, I'm just I think if we do Markets 2.0, I would just replace the reputation factor with FVT staking and just forget the reputation factor and just be like how much are you willing to lose to have me listen to your opinion? And then, but on the other hand, it's like, there's a lot of, when we're looking at outcomes, the potential outcome of this could be really high, but there's like a pretty, it's not, the probability of that happening is not close to 1 to me. Whereas like some of our other apps, if we like focus more on those, yield is already something that's making us money, even if you just count the partner pool. And so it's less miraculous for that to become profitable, although it's maybe less likely to be outrageously profitable. But that's how I'm thinking about it, that there's apply the probability of it being successful.
Yeah, and I think one of the highest probability outcomes for going viral is being the app that has this is the top 21 tokens on each chain in the space. Like, how do we get to that? And it might be that we just use influence to do that. So we can come back to that on the influence session. But yeah, so I'm sensing that there's a potential governance vote coming up, which is, what should we do about markets? Should we let it run until it hits this inevitable conclusion that there's 1 to 2 users taking the part every week? Or do we brick it now and essentially shut that game down? And
I have a question about staking. Oh, there's a delay, sorry. I have a question about staking. If you allow people to stake, so they lose their stake if they're wrong, and then you do slow markets, like for instance, what coin is going to survive for over the year, can you issue them some kind of token so they can trade their place in a bit like LP tokens, so they can trade their place in that they stake, so they're not just stuck there?
Yeah, and so I think there's a lot of potential for users making suggestions like you're doing now. I think what we've got to do over the next few months is build up a very coherent conversation with our community about what we should do next. I think the decision is, do we pause the game now, shut down the inflation, rebuild, and then launch again, or completely to kill the development trajectory? I think there's a number of different possible outcomes here. But what I think is going to be valuable for the DAO is people, now they understand the game, it's been running for all this time, we can do a serious debrief on it, and then have a really critical conversation about what we should do next about it, and then come up with a number of possible outcomes and vote on it. So this was very valuable. I'm mindful that we've gone over the time assigned to markets at this point. I think the outcome here is that we need to produce a kind of waypoint analysis and open it up to the users to suggest what happens next. So unless anyone's got any final stuff to throw in on this.
I just want to quickly ask, just for my own understanding, to me it seems like the main things are, so the desired outcome is a consensus sorted index to actively invest in, and the main sort of issues that we discussed is this nothing at stake issue, the reputation issue, and we want people to eventually autonomously be able to suggest tokens for the ballot. Is that a good summary of
I think so. I think so, yeah.
Okay. Cool.
All right. Shall we roll straight into the next app and then have a break afterwards?
We have there is a question I want to ask, Nick. Okay, in a situation where we allow users to make a review or suggestion of a project, how are we going to combat, or how are we going to tackle, maybe there are some people who maybe some coordinated frauds for a particular project, maybe the one that users are going to make their reviews, and there are some people who are having some negative intention over the project, and they just coordinate and make some bad reviews. How are we going to handle this kind of issue, maybe if it arises?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's you suggested it like the opposite of the issue that I thought would arise. So what we considered to be more likely is that, let's say we've got the top 21 cryptos on each chain, and it becomes very desirable to be in that list. The more likely outcome for me is that people will essentially do a kind of governance attack to try and get their token into that list. The opposite could happen, like you suggested, is like FUD the tokens to get them out of the list. This is something
which they're kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Because if the list can't have more than 21 and you're not in it, somebody's gonna have to get out.
But for me, that is the game. Like you and I would hit this, that we called it shitcoin gerrymandering, which is like this idea that we'd have this constant argument and battle over what tokens go in and what come out. Again, I want that to happen. So the question to answer there, Dante, is like, if we solve that problem, we basically solve token-weighted voting for governance. Right, so we're creating a game here which is almost inviting to be attacked. Like I want it to be attacked, because that's how you figure out how to stop attacks. So I'd just love that to happen, because if that happens, someone's had to buy a shit ton of our tokens to FUD some token. So it just creates volume through the FVT token, and it also just generates a sort of like exciting conversation around governance, which just isn't happening anywhere yet. We've got an exciting conversation happening over Uniswap at the moment, and the cost of that was $30 million going to lobbyists. I think we need those conflicts in order to build voting technologies that work in a decentralized way. So the answer is we probably won't be able to stop it to start with, but over iterations, we'll be able to figure out how to mitigate against it over time. Can't get anything right first time. And I don't think we've got markets right first time, but I don't think we should give up on it either. So yeah, I think we're at an interesting point where I think maybe we should reach this decision quite soon, is do we essentially pause this game and restart it, or let it just play out to its inevitable end and then upgrade it, or just retire the whole development trajectory and focus on other stuff. So I think that's the crossroads we're at with this one. And I think we probably have to put it out to a governance vote. We should probably do that pretty soon. Does everyone agree?
Okay. Thank you.
That's all right.
I agree. Yeah.
Naomi, do you agree?
Yeah, I think we're at that point. I think we can start asking the question. I think there's maybe a high level question of whether we retire it or keep it. And then there's the more detailed question of if we are keeping it, how we're going to improve it.
Yes. Yeah. There's what is a relatively costless approach is if we're going to improve it, how? Right. And we can essentially design the next iteration of this application completely theoretically to start with, and then say, okay, this sounds like a good idea. I would love to see the users get involved in designing the next iteration of it. And then it gets to the point where the users really want this new version of it, and then we build it. Yeah, I think that's what we should aim for, is let's get the governance going on the next iteration of this game. I think there'll be some amount of disappointment if we just ended it. But yeah, that's what governance is for. Okay, so what's the next application we were going to talk about?
We were supposed to start with markets or influence, and then we kind of got into markets. So
did we? That's totally my fault. I thought we were starting with markets. So shall we go into influence now then, or does people want a break?
I've got my call in 45. I got the engineering stand up, so
yeah, okay, so let's do 45 minutes on influence. We did a bit at the start of this before I completely sent us in the wrong direction. Okay, we've had this sort of correlated conversation with this. Yubi, do you want to give us an update technologically where we're at with influence?
Yeah, it's really just in clean up and polish mode right now, but what we've got is a scalable system for distributing voter IDs as NFTs to, when I say scalable, meaning we can have on-chain verification of this voter IDs with essentially more voter IDs than there are humans on the planet. So we've got a system for essentially, I think, a very reasonable revenue model for that, where you can vote for free. You don't even have to pay gas to vote. But if you want to claim your NFT and maybe trade it or sell it, then you have to, prove on chain that you're eligible, which costs a bit of gas, and then we charge you a little extra ether, and we use that to buy FET and burn it. So that's the incinerator model. There's also we have a vote attestation or system where we basically commit to all the voter data on chain. So like with the hash of the entire voter set is put on chain, and then also the hash of the entire, all the vote data itself, after people have voted, is also put on chain.
What do you mean by claim the NFT?
Meaning that we're not actually going to send you an NFT. You will simply be provably eligible to get the NFT, but you would pay the gas to do that. It's the voter ID for a space or whatever we end up calling it. But basically, if we have a partner on influence, they get their own kind of voting system, and then this is their voter ID.
So this doesn't actually exist yet then? This is for partners?
No, it exists right now. That's what I'm saying. It works right now, and we're doing it for our first partner essentially this week or next week.
Sorry, I was just confused about that. Yeah.
So let me give you an example, Jess. So let's say we can do this with literally any token. So you can look at a token and see an address for every single person that holds it. So let's say a token has 25,000 holders, right? Some people might hold one token, some people might hold millions. We've then got a list of addresses of people who have engaged with that token. We can essentially put 25,000 NFTs in a box ready to be claimed, right? So they sit in a smart contract waiting to be claimed. And what we can do is attribute 100 voice credits in influence to each address of every token holder for that token. If they want to, they can go to the contract and redeem an NFT, which let's say is, so let's say it's the Shiba Inu token, right? There's 600,000 token holders of that. We can give every SHIB holder an NFT starting at NFT number 1 to NFT number 600,000. And then they've just got governance now. So most tokens in the space don't have governance, right? So we can essentially airdrop governance onto any token in the space if we wanted to. That's what the system does.
And they all have 100 V to start out with.
Yeah.
And so this is where the reputation factor would come back into play with an influence.
So again, we've generated a new iteration of quadratic voting. So basic quadratic voting is the number of voice credits you have is just how many you want to buy. If I want 100 votes, I have to buy $1 million worth of votes. Like I have to spend $1 million to get them. That's it. So V, if you like, or the amount of voice credits you have is just how many you want to buy out, like just how many votes you want to buy. It just gets exponentially costly with every vote.
Okay. Yeah.
So Glenn Whale suggested a second iteration of this, which is that you give everyone a budget of voice credits and they decide how to spend them over a period of time. So he suggested like 100 voice credits, and you just give everyone 100 voice credits and then they can spend them on issues that they care about, like sequentially, right? Now, what we've done is take that budget of voice credits and make it potentially variable. So the amount of voice credits that you have is not 100 each. It's variable based on something. So in markets, it's based on your history of prediction, but really it can be anything. So we could give, let's say, it based on role. So let's say we come up with a sequence of 6 roles in the DAO from super senior to entry level, and then we can just give different amounts of voting power to different levels of people in the DAO.
This is a pretty important conversation in terms of, because we're talking about like governance decisions here. So some people will have a more weighted governance decision over others, which there's no problem with that, but it's just, it's an interesting conversation.
Well, exactly.
And currently there is no reputation factor.
Yeah,
like on influence. We could make one. We haven't.
It's the strategies that we can basically, anyone can design any reputation factor they want for this. It's basically off chain, so we can iterate on it quite a lot. So in the case of markets, we've basically hard coded this strategy into the game on day one, and it cannot be changed. In influence, we can off-chain nuance how the voting power is distributed to any of the NFTs in any way you want. You could say, I'm going to give Bob, because I like him, 10,000 V, or it can be based on any number of other activities. So it could be based on the amount of tokens you're holding. And in the white paper, I've suggested a structure where you stack people in a kind of pyramid, and it depends on what layer they're in as to how many voice credits they've got. I'm really keen to try that out at some point in the future, and I think we can pretty soon with this current system.
I think that's a really interesting idea. I'd be to see how it plays out as well. And this just got me thinking, I don't know if this is appropriate, but it's just an idea. Like, what if you have different abilities to increase your voting power, but once you use a certain amount, let's have 100 of your voting power. In the next vote, you have 100 less now. And maybe there's some kind of mechanism that resets it at some point in the future. But so it's not just you're infinitely more powerful than others.
Yeah. So again, these kind of suggestions anyone can try out. So we can. It's an open. It's like a blank slate for reputation systems, right? So at the moment we're starting to see at the moment we've got just basic on-chain voting, which is one coin, one vote. This week we saw that. So for example, on the Uniswap decision, and this is very timely for us because essentially what we're trying to solve here is pure plutocracy in voting systems, which is you can swing a vote if you've got enough money. And so what happened there, I think the vote was like 50 million to 30 million or something like that. And the proposer voted with their own stack. So they proposed, you need 10 million to make a proposal. So they had that, made a proposal, said, I want 30 million quid, and then voted on their own proposal and then got their mates to do it. So essentially three people's stacks swung the vote in their favor. And this is the issue with one coin, one vote. Now, what we've got here is a mechanism that's not one coin, one vote. It's the opposite end of this spectrum, which is essentially one address, one vote, or one person, one vote, or one person, one quadratic vote. So that's the continuum you've got to work with. Now, there's things in between where there's any amount of socially coordinated modifications to the amount of votes that people get, through to using token stake or some mix of it, or even just turning up to meetings. There's anything you can do with it. I'm thinking we just need to create a strategy, some logic off chain for how voice credits are distributed to each address.
That's right, and it wouldn't be difficult to put it on chain at some point. There's we can use Merkle roots to like commit to voter reputation on chain periodically.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's necessary right now or ever, but yeah, this notion of strategy is well abstract at this point. So it's basically, how do you go from an Ethereum address to a number of voice credits?
Yeah, so I think this is a huge step forward in on-chain governance, or at least decentralized, semi-decentralized governance. And there is almost an infinite design space for how you can play with who gets what vote.
I have a comment on that regarding partners, because I think what is super important is to onboard other DAOs to actually use this thing. And what I find difficult even for myself is to understand what dials you can adjust and what comes out. So it's a bit like this. What I'm saying is that besides from the deck, it would be great to design some kind of a workshop to which anyone from the community could just invite, like an info pack. So we don't need like Nick or Yuvi to brief everyone who's potentially a client of that, right?
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And we're giving the power to design governance to people, and they don't know how to do it yet. But we don't know how to do it yet either. So it starts with this simple structure of every address gets 100 voice credits. And then, like I said, it would require some kind of co-design workshop to say, okay, how do you want to nuance the power in your DAO? It's a blank slate. You can do
when someone is like selling a nicer dicer on TV, and then they chop the carrots and they chop the potatoes, and then you want this thing. So maybe we need something like that.
I agree. I think,
or a menu of, there's like a custom thing on the menu, but then there's 3 choices which are very common and reasonable.
So
it's just, how do we present this governance machine to people, because it's like so new. You can do governance with it. What kind of governance? Any kind of governance, and you can adjust all the dials, and then it's already too complicated, I think, to just communicate.
It's new. But it's not necessarily even that complicated. It's just new, and so people don't understand it yet. So I think there's the potential. So as is, I think might suggest this in one of our principles. I think we mentioned it yesterday, is like lead by example. So the way that we do it is do it ourselves, and we utilize these mechanisms and find, let's say, 3 core strategies. Right? There's like strategy A, B, and C. And that's in the kind of like choice palette that people have got for nuancing their governance decisions. So, for example, our first client has a token with different weights, with different amounts that people hold, standard mapping of tokens. But they've also got a kind of reputation factor that they've developed over time. And we can nuance the amount of voice credits people have based on that reputation system. So we can custom design governance for DAOs, and that might be a service that we provide. But what we've got to do is just do it. People can't theoretically understand new things. They have to see it with their own eyes. So what we're going to do is just basically just do it, right? And people can understand we don't know what the frailties of the system are until they've been put into practice. So we're going to start doing this pretty soon. And I think the question is, where are we going to go next with it? We've got this kind of Merkle drop system that can distribute an open-ended number of NFTs. We can essentially airdrop governance onto any token in the space. Where do we want to see it go next? Any thoughts?
I think you've just answered this, Nick, but just so I understand as well, this new sort of iteration of influence we're talking about, that would coexist alongside the current token weighted influence that also is the current iteration, right?
That's another strategy, right? So I think we're gonna. So at the end of the day, if you diminish token weighting completely, there's no point in the token, right? Everyone can hold one token, and that's enough. But there should be some degree of power in the system for holding more tokens. That's the kind of dynamic of governance tokens. And if you retire that completely, then there's no point in the token at all. So it's not like we don't want to end up in this kind of baby out with the bathwater thing. Just because pure plutocracy is suboptimal doesn't mean some amount of vote weight based on the amount of tokens you've got is bad. Right? There's a middle ground. So at the moment, we already have done this, and I think we should continue to do it, is hold votes which are token weighted and hold votes which are NFT weighted. And discover and iterate what the kind of design space of governance is in between.
Yeah, because there does seem to be obviously some push and pull between the token and between FVT, for example, and influence. And I think sometimes that can be, like, just from experience explaining this to other people who are new to the project, they can sometimes trip up going, so hang on a minute, what's the difference between influence and FVT, and why would I hold one over the other, etc. And I guess, as you're saying, it's a sort of constant iteration, right? You just keep tweaking it until you find a nice balance. Yeah,
there is no right first time in anything.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is creating a system. What would be amazing is if we got a dozen DAOs all using this, all trying different stuff, and we facilitated them to either build their own strategies, or we've built strategies to help them out. And then governance plays out in these 12 DAOs, and then one DAO does really well, making really good decisions, and then everyone learns from it.
Yeah. It sounds like a hackathon for influence only with DAO leaders and like DAO governance hackers we know already. Would be nice.
I like the idea of a governance hackathon.
It's a bit like usually a hackathon is when some boring bank opens their API. So it's almost like we could give people influence, and maybe as a reward we can help them to integrate it with their token, but have it like as an SDK sort of governance SDK with influence sort of thing.
Yeah, I think we need, in advance of that, is if we were going to run a hackathon or some kind of workshop on how to design your governance using this, I'd want a bunch of like evidence or uses of it in practice to go and say, look, this is what happens when you do this. This is what happens when you do that. Now come up with new ideas.
But can we have internal use cases that are large enough, or is it just like we can have internal use cases, like for instance with principles we will have one, but I don't know if we can have enough internal use cases to really know what happens, because right now it's just friends pretty much going to be voting on stuff and people who like each other. So it's not likely we're going to have a tax on the system. You know what I mean? For instance,
this is a good point. So we already are leading by example. We've done votes with this already, but we don't have 500,000 token holders to really give this a run.
So we need this hackathon to get these people and explain to them that it's a risk. But right now, if we're voting on our principles, no one's going to come and say, oh no, I want my principle in everyone takes psychedelics or something. No, like no one will actually hijack it because you know what I mean.
Yeah, so we're all relatively well aligned and a relatively small number of people. So we basically haven't really started the DAO governance decision stuff yet. That's what happens in our next phase. So we don't have these super contentious issues yet, but others do. If we wanted to, we could go and give every uni holder one NFT, like next week, and say, all right, now it's a level playing field.
It's controversial. We
haters and just say, look, all right, so token weighted voting doesn't work. Let's try one person one. And if no one knew it was coming, they couldn't split their stacks, Sybil it, and it would mean
right. And we could redo existing votes they've had. Hey guys, we don't think this vote was fair. At the request of some uni users.
So what we could do is go to their governance forum, look at all the proposals, all the temperature check. So they've got this thing called temperature check, where people can say, hey, I think we should do this. And if it gets like a lot of traction, then it moves to a kind of snapshot vote, moves to a kind of proposals. We could just put all their proposals in a list on Influence and say, what do people want?
How do you, sorry, this is minority maybe, but how do you stop them just mobilizing and doing exactly what they do and just saying, hey, everyone vote for this?
That's just lobbying. That's governance.
But that's fine.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it also means anybody can do that. So you could do that for yours, someone else could do it for theirs, so then it's got a better political campaign.
Yeah, it turns it into politics then rather than plutocracy, which is the point, right?
Because now that's a weird tagline. I like it, like politics over plutocracy.
It's quite good, isn't it? Write that down.
In terms of moving forward with the whole thing, it seems like the next step is to provide this for another project and then also implement it within our own. Is it possible to implement it for our next governance vote?
The NFT distribution thing. We've got our NFT, we've got our identity systems, which have been issued via the auction, which have been primarily used.
Another strategy in some sense.
Yeah, you know. We are going to issue more kinds of NFTs within the system. This is one way we could do it, for sure.
Yeah, we already have voter IDs for our system. I don't see a lot of.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that I don't think we need to do it for ourselves because we've essentially obtained a distribution of NFTs through our auction mechanism. I don't think we need to airdrop a load of new ones to different people. So now the other thing is that anyone can do this. It doesn't have to be. So one strategy is to collect a bunch of addresses just by looking at token mapping.
Anyway, go ahead.
Do you mean the uni thing?
No, just raiding an existing community, right?
Yeah.
There's actually like so much interesting information in just having this list of addresses who all have transaction histories and they all own the same token. Like what an interesting kind of column to pivot on in the database of Ethereum.
I think I even put it in the white paper that we can essentially give people mini DAOs whether they want one or not. This is what we'd be doing. It would be a ballsy move. I don't know what's the temperature in it. What do you think it would be a good idea, or what are people's thoughts?
Let's take the top 20 ERC20 tokens and go fucking put them in cages and make them pay tax to us.
Maybe let's kick one hornet's nest first.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's do one. Let's do one, and if it works, let's go kick them all.
We could do it. We could literally just essentially force governance, quadratic governance onto every token in the space if we wanted to.
Let's teach these monkeys how to dance.
All right, so that's one way to do it. The other is that there's someone decides, I want to do voting with my community, and it could be a YouTuber, for example. So it could be someone who says, hey, I want to know what content you guys want me to make. Go and set up a MetaMask account and send me an Ethereum address, and I will whitelist your votes, right? So we've got this collection process, and influencers can then essentially turn their feed into a DAO, is one of the things I've said before. So that, do we want to try and do that? Can we find someone who's willing to give this a go?
In that version, how do the users, apart from obviously saying, I want to see you do more God knows, TA or whatever, and then
Yeah.
if they're right, they get that. Is there some sort of incentive beyond that in like a token reward? Would it be the same kind of deal, or is it just another way of doing like a poll but with a spread of bets, like quadratically?
Yeah, it's basically just a polling system at the moment. But if they wanted a token, they could issue a token as well. If they wanted
we could make it rewards for them. Be like, hey guys, listen, if you get this much engagement, we'll just fucking pay you in our token.
Yeah, we could give them FVT for sure. And you know, we're gonna do an airdrop of FVT to voters on our first partner use case of this. But they could have their own token as well.
If you want to target the influencers, I think we should go straight to BitCloud, right? This would be perfect for those kind of people.
So unfortunately, the BitCloud doesn't necessarily interact with Ethereum addresses, so we don't get.
No, we target those people. We say, hey guys, look, we have this thing, and it actually allows you to potentially interact with your audience much better. Yeah.
Go round up all the narcissists and make them like president of their own kind of.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it's certainly the auction system for the NFT issuances better than the BitClout bonding curve.
You know, sorry, this might be, I think this is what you're saying, but there are a lot of, for example, TA crypto YouTubers, for example, who at the start of every day will be like, when I go live at 3, which token do you want me to do TA?
Which token should I TA?
And they're getting absolutely sick of just getting bombarded, and they will do a poll on Twitter and there'll be D, another token, and they'll end up just having to go through their entire comments list of like 5,000 top. And they probably don't bother doing it, but this feels like a really easy tap in terms of just saying that. And if you can then incentivize the users or the influencer in some way to adopt it, I don't see why they wouldn't do it. And it feels like a very simple way of starting out.
So that's a very clear message. Be like, hey, influencer, increase engagement with your audience and save time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what chart next?
And like Tom Crown, for example, it seems to be like in terms of everyone I've seen, Tom Crown tends to be the most down to earth and pretty chilled out. And for some reason, he likes every single tweet I make about FVT. So I don't know whether he's got an eye on it or whatever. But he's Tom Crown is his name, Tom Crown Crypto. But he also just like when he started out, he would just take requests or whatever via super chats. But this feels like I don't know. He strikes me as someone who's quite open to this sort of thing.
Yeah, so one of these TA guys, so he could basically run a vote every week or however often he does a video, and then get a list of tokens that people want charted, and then he can just do as many as he wants.
Yeah, but all these influencers, they don't care what the audience wants. It's who pays them. They do the charts.
This is why I suggested Tom, because I suggested Tom because he's not like that at all. I like it genuinely. He seems to just want to please the audience and do their suggestions, and also he hangs out in like Twitch chats of people just starting out who have 5 or 6 viewers, and will stay for 2 hours and chat to them and try and support them and send viewers their way and stuff. So he seems like a legit nice guy.
All right, I didn't know that influencers like that exist. Actually,
I know, right?
I was just gonna say, actually, like these Twitch streamers definitely have a much better connection with their audience, and Twitch is really blowing up right now. There's a lot of really famous Twitch streamers. I think that honestly, those kind of people would probably be the best people to target, because they depend on their audience to make money.
What's up, traders? Today.
So I think we need to, again, let's get a starting set of evidence. I think we're going to have that in the next week or two with the first use case of this, and then let's start approaching some of these people. So essentially, the business model is there'll be a subset of the people. There'll be a bunch of people who provide an Ethereum address and a get a vote. And then there'll be a bunch of people who say, okay, I want the Tom Crown NFT, right? And I want NFT number 1, or I want NFT number 7, or 420, or whatever. And every one of these NFTs that's minted burns some FVT in the background, right? So this is potentially hugely, like a high amount of utility for the token.
And the bonus of like someone like a crypto TA is the majority of their audience will have an Ethereum address already in MetaMask, because they're watching it because they're into crypto.
So
100%. Yeah, I think this sounds like a serious plan, guys.
Yeah. So playing this out, what does influence look like when we've got 50 influencers, 25 DAOs, and all these other whoever else wants to use it? Like what patient to facilitate that.
So I think we're really close. I basically, from my point of view, we're at the point where let's try it out on our first partner, maybe one more, but then I want to get a spreadsheet full of all these people and just go biz dev ham on it. I think we're about ready to start selling this thing.
Yeah, I don't think we're far off at all. I think I suspect we're deployment and some iteration on the sort of front end to make. Every time we've released something, there's always been a kind of 4 to 6 week cycle of just improvement around the front end and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's just going to be a kind of let's suck it and see thing and get our first customers up and running on it. I think, yeah, one's going to give us a good data set, and I think we need to go and recruit 1 or 2 others. We've had some suggestions we're also talking to another NFT project that might be interested in doing this, maybe 2. So I think we need to land the first few.
And we could, yes, and let's start building that spreadsheet now. And we could use Influence to help build that spreadsheet from our users. Be like, what influencer next?
Yeah.
I think like the other thing is don't underestimate the impact of let's say we reached out to Tom first, like the impact of us declaring that he's the first person who will have this, instead of doing that sort of spreading our bets and going maybe approaching 5 or 6. I reckon a maybe slightly more tactful approach at one at a time might work, because you're more likely for them to go, oh shit, this is cool, and also they'll feel quite special the fact that we reached out to them first. And I think the other thing about that influence rate in the spreadsheet is they have to be like Ksenia says, a lot of those influencers don't exist in terms of who are genuinely interested in that sort of world and are doing it for the right reasons. And so we should try and make sure we find those people. I don't know who else exists. But
we need a sort of test group, if you like, then. Because the other side of this is that we don't have the flow yet for whoever does this setting up their own votes.
Yeah.
So we need to get to the point where
we do have that.
So they can set their own proposal up, decide their own tags. How is it gated? How do we? Is it just
so there's a whitelist of addresses for the create a proposal.
Okay.
And that's easy enough to change if we need to change that. And then there's for proposing what token next or whatever. Right now you just have to have one FVT.
Yeah. But
yeah, that's ready to go. We may want to update the design but so let's test it out. But I don't think that's that's not a blocker.
Okay.
I think this came up before. I don't know how we addressed it, but there's a kind of an educational aspect to this as well, because we have to show these people how to use this, because it's like a very new thing. So it's not just going to know how to use it intuitively.
Yeah, and I think we're going to be, as a DAO, we should be the ones leading the kind of way on experimentation with it, and with a view to building out the educational materials for it.
Like an app tutorial. Part of that is installing something like Lucky Orange into the site so we can see where people are getting lost in the site.
Mm-hmm. Is that like Hotjar?
Yeah, it's basically the same thing.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that we want some starting partners. We've got that ball rolling. Let's try and recruit 2 or 3 other people. Chris, I'm happy for you to approach that guy if you want to get in touch with him and see if he's up for it.
Send people, or I remember we were talking about that.
Yeah, we've got the one that we've been using so far, so we can just generalize it. I can put that into the next few days.
It would be a lifesaver. Yeah, a generalized tech. I just want that a lot. Yeah.
Or even if we want to speculatively contact this guy, we can respin the one that we've got tailored for him.
We could tailor one to different audiences. So I don't know if we want to do it for each one, but if there's like more crypto influencers or people who do, so we could do a general one for people who do token analysis.
Yeah, I think we might want to do an individual one to recruit this kind of like test set of people. Maybe one like 3, 4, 5 people we're going to iterate around to start to create individual decks for them, and then build one for each sector almost. So you're a YouTuber, so you're a Twitch streamer, that kind of stuff. So you're an artist, so you're a blogger. all that sort of stuff.
And we've got a lot of, we should get like Zebu helping us with the messaging there. We've got, because each of these people are going to need like, these customer segments all need different messages. Well,
yeah. Okay. Next step then is to build out broaden our little testing group and facilitate, the small test group to do their first votes, make sure everything works, make sure the UX is nice, iterate around suggestions based on the first votes from those people, and then build out essentially a kind of biz dev funnel that we can attack lots of different sectors with.
Sorry, I have a question regarding, because the first thing in the process is for them to select the tags. For TA, it's easy because it's just cash tags, right? But,
it's the what token next vote, basically, which we've already designed.
But if it's something more complicated, some kind of a governance thing, then maybe we can also have a slide on helping people. How do you actually select these tags?
Yeah, what I think it isn't actually ready for actual governance yet because it's missing the proposal version. I think one of the things we've got to do is, if we're going to replace discourse as the kind of like forum place where proposals are discussed, I think we need to start thinking about if influence becomes our major sort of focus of attention, then we need to quite quickly be thinking about how we actually do proposal systems in it, which means getting proposals sorted and starting that off. Because at the moment it's just raw signaling, right? It's a list of tags.
But then it should probably integrate with something like discourse. It shouldn't replace it. It should just like scan discourse and select tags and then batch them somehow into proposals or something.
Isn't there already some pretty good models of, I guess, I haven't really looked into it too much, but what Yearn does and all these different DAOs in terms of proposing things that get put up to a vote?
There's a very standard stack, which is essentially discourse, which is a white label forum system, and snapshot. So snapshot, the voting component is what we're attempting to replace there. What we don't have is the more discursive proposal discussion space just yet. So Naomi, I'm presuming that you don't want us to just integrate with discourse.
No, when we discussed this, the whole point was to create one system that was much more effective than this. Discourse is like an extremely outdated, it's upgraded and it's open source, but like universities have been using it for years. It's missing so much. It could be a lot more. So the plan here was to take what snapshot, that pack that Nick's saying, the discourse to snapshot vote, and create one tool that does it all with much better like additions of like quadratic voting and token gated. And it's just, using discourse would defeat the purpose.
And so maybe there's an opportunity to have, if discourse is open source, we might be able to have import your system from discourse, and you press a button and now you live in influence. You don't have to set anything up. I don't really know exactly what discourse does.
It's just a forum.
Importing stuff, I think it's super important. If it's portable, then people would do it. If it's not, because they're stuck, it's like a network effect. They stuck to their forum system. If you could just upload the whole thing to influence, to proposal.vote, that's like super powerful.
Yes, I think if there's a migrate button where you can just like retire discourse by uploading it.
I got to go in just a second, but one last thing I want to propose was, okay, if we do this Shiba Inu raid their community thing, what proposals do we want? What proposals does every token community, or maybe a sequence of proposals, and then we like somehow get that started? I don't know. I just feel like Nick would have some good ideas about this.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this, and the only thing that stops me from saying let's do this like tomorrow is that it just ends at the signaling. Right, we're missing the proposal system. It's still not a governance platform yet, but we could phrase it like a signaling system. I think it's what features do you want from your system? It's what do you want next is basically the thing. And it would be interesting to see similar tags across different tokens. Like, how do the communities differ in their intentions? But yeah, the kind of raid thing it would be a spicy thing to do. I'm not convinced it's the right thing to do.
We got to get some action, get everyone back in the game. Oh my God, look at that sunset. That is gorgeous. I just want y'all to know we have the best sunsets here. They're the greatest sunsets everyone's ever seen. We're right on the ocean here, living large and spending not very much money because we're in Bali. And
all right, shall we? I think that's a really good update of where we're at with influence at the moment. Is there anything else people want to mention on influence before we have a bit of a break? All right.
This was just like a fun thing, but would it be feasible that a whole social media platform could be built from this technology?
Yes.
Cool.
That's very much where I think we'll end up one day.
I have a really specific question which was relevant about 42 minutes ago, and that token weighted voting thing we were talking about, cast your minds back. Obviously, once you've staked, for example, all your FVT, let's say in either resident pool or basic pool, that then has an implication on your ability to do token weighted voting. Is that just a thing that's okay, that's what it is, you're getting a reward from yield, so that's the trade-off? Or is there a way of using your staked FVT beyond that in influence?
This is an interesting question, and because we'll have quite a diverse utility set, including some staking stuff, I think as it's currently designed, you would not have your staked assets are out of the token weighted voting. So we take a snapshot. You're not holding the FVT anymore. You're holding the SLP tokens. Now we could snapshot SLP tokens as well. And how Yearn do it is you have to actually send your tokens to a governance vault for them to be considered in the vote.
Yeah.
So no is natively at the moment, but it is an interesting thing to keep in mind in the future, because having tokens votable when they're staked is a good thing, or even vested.
Yeah, exactly.
So you might have tokens that are not accessible yet. But yeah, no, it's a really important thing to keep in mind, I think. No, it's an important thing, and I have been thinking about that. It's at the moment, it's basically just what spot tokens you're holding in your wallet.